The rain had been falling since dawn, and by the time the church bells struck 3, the cobblestones of Marlow Street were slick and black and cold. People hurried past with their heads down, umbrellas tilted against the wind, boots splashing through the gutter water. Nobody looked up. Nobody looked sideways. Nobody looked at the small figure sitting on the stone step outside the shuttered bakery, weeping into her hands. The girl could not have been more than 6 years old. Her dress had once been white, though now it was gray at the hem and soaked through at the shoulders. Her hair, a pale honey color, hung in wet ropes around her thin face. She was not crying loudly. She was not screaming for help. She was simply weeping in the small, quiet way that children weep when they have already learned that no one is coming. A woman in a green cloak passed her by. A man with a walking stick stepped around her puddle. A boy carrying a tray of oysters glanced once, then hurried on. A gentleman in a fine hat did not glance at all. The rain kept falling. From the far end of the street, a young woman named Vivienne Ashcombe was walking with a basket over her arm. She had been to the fishmonger, and the smell of cold salt and riverweed clung to the cloth that covered her purchase. Her boots were sensible and old. Her cloak was gray wool, the kind that turned darker when wet, and it was very wet indeed. She had spent her last shilling on a pair of eggs, a bit of mackerel, and a paper twist of tea leaves, and she was thinking about how to make it all stretch until Friday. She was not thinking about crying children, because she did not yet know there was one. Then she heard it. That small, thin sound. Not a wail, not a scream. Just a soft, breaking, hopeless sob. Vivienne stopped in the middle of the street. A cart clattered past behind her. Someone bumped her shoulder and muttered a word she did not repeat. She stood very still, and she listened. The sob came again. She turned her head. The child was there, on the step. Her small shoulders shook. Her small hands were pressed against her small wet face. Around her, the world moved on. A woman with a market basket walked within 3 feet of her and did not turn her head. A clerk with an armful of papers stepped over the child's feet as if she were a puddle. Vivienne felt something hot and sharp rise in her chest. It was not quite anger. It was closer to grief, that so many people could pass, and none of them stop, that a child could sit in the cold rain and weep, and be seen by so many eyes, and still be invisible. She crossed the street. The cobblestones bit through the thin soles of her boots. Her breath came out in a small white cloud. The wind smelled of coal smoke and wet leather and the sour green scent of the river. She knelt down on the step in front of the child, and she set her basket beside her, and she made her voice soft and steady. "Hello, little one," she said. The child did not look up. Her small shoulders tightened. "I am not going to hurt you," Vivienne said. She reached into her basket and pulled out the handkerchief she kept there, plain white cotton with her initials worked in blue thread by her mother years ago. She held it out. "May I dry your face?" The child peeked between her fingers. Her eyes were the color of wet slate, gray and dark and very tired. She said nothing. "My name is Vivienne," Vivienne said. "I live not far from here. What is your name?" The child pressed her lips together. A tear slid down her cheek and mixed with the rain. "You do not have to tell me if you do not wish to," Vivienne said. She lowered the handkerchief. "Are you lost?" A small nod. "Are you cold?" A smaller nod. "Are you hungry?" The child did not nod, but her hand tightened around a small, wet cloth doll that Vivienne had not noticed before. The doll had one button eye missing and a smudge of dirt across its face, and it was clutched so tightly that its fabric arm was bent in half. Vivienne looked around the street. The people kept passing. Nobody paused. Nobody asked. She had lived in this part of the city for 4 years, and she had learned that the world could be a very indifferent place when a person's cloak was thin and her name was not written in the ledgers of any great house. She was, she supposed, learning it again now. "Well," Vivienne said, and she made her voice bright, because she had learned that bright voices were what small frightened people needed. "I am going home to make tea. And I have a fire, and I have a warm shawl that will fit you very nicely. Would you like to come with me while we find your people?" The child looked at her for a long time. The rain ran down her nose. Then, slowly, she nodded. Vivienne held out her hand. The child took it. Her fingers were so cold that Vivienne almost drew back in shock. She swallowed the shock down and smiled instead. "Come along, then. My rooms are just around the corner." She lifted the basket, and she lifted the child too, because the child weighed almost nothing, and because she saw that the small feet were bare beneath the wet dress. Bare, in November, in the rain. Vivienne felt that hot, sharp feeling again. She tucked the child against her side, under the wet gray cloak, and she started walking. Behind her, the crowd flowed on. Not a single person looked back. Her rooms were on the second floor above a chandler's shop, up a narrow wooden stair that smelled of tallow and old rain. Vivienne climbed with the child in her arms, and she pushed the door open with her hip, and she carried her charge inside. The room was small. There was a bed in one corner, a wooden table beneath the window, 2 chairs, a chest, and a hearth where a few coals still glowed under a covering of ash. On the mantel sat 3 things: a small clock her father had given her, a book of poems her mother had once read aloud, and a chipped teacup she had kept from the house she no longer lived in. Vivienne set the child down on one of the chairs. She built up the fire with quick, practiced motions, and when it was crackling, she pulled the child close to it. She peeled off the wet dress with careful fingers. She wrapped the small body in the warm shawl from the chest, the one her mother had made for her the winter before she died. She rubbed the small feet until color came back into them, and the child whimpered softly, and Vivienne murmured, "I know, I know. The warmth hurts at first, but it will pass. It will pass." The child watched her the whole time, not speaking, just watching. Vivienne put the kettle on the fire and cut 2 slices of the brown bread she had bought that morning. She spread them with a thin layer of butter and set them on a plate. She poured a cup of watery milk from the jug on the sill. She placed all of this on the table before the child, and she pulled up her own chair, and she said, "Eat, dear heart." The child ate. Slowly at first, and then very fast, and then slowly again, as if she were remembering not to hurry. Vivienne watched her, and her heart hurt in a strange way, and she said nothing at all until the plate was empty. "There now," she said. She wiped a crumb from the child's cheek with the corner of the handkerchief. "That is better. Now, will you tell me your name?" The child looked at the doll in her lap. She whispered, "Sabine, Sabine," Vivienne said. She said it gently, as if she were tasting it. "That is a beautiful name. And how old are you, Sabine?" Sabine held up 6 fingers, 6 years old. "My, that is a very grand age." Vivienne smiled. "And do you know where your home is?" Sabine's face crumpled. She shook her head, then she shook it harder. A small sound came out of her, half sob and half whisper, and Vivienne caught the shape of a word in it. She leaned closer. "What was that, love?" "They said," Sabine whispered, "they said to wait. They said they would come back." Vivienne felt the cold in her chest again. "Who said, Sabine? Who told you to wait?" "The lady in the carriage," Sabine said. Her small mouth trembled. She said, "Sit here, and I will fetch you shortly." But she did not come back, and the sun went behind the houses. And she did not come back. Vivienne closed her eyes for a moment. She had heard stories of this. Children left in the street on purpose. Sometimes because their families could no longer feed them. Sometimes because the person carrying them had no love for them and no wish to be burdened. She did not know which had happened here, and she did not think it mattered right now. What mattered was that the child was safe and warm and fed, and that Vivienne would have to think very carefully about what came next. "Well," she said. She kept her voice steady. "You will stay here tonight, Sabine, and we will have a nice sleep, and in the morning we will think about what to do." Sabine looked at her with those gray eyes, and Vivienne could not tell what the child was thinking. Then, very slowly, Sabine reached out and touched Vivienne's hand with one small finger, and she said, "You are kind." Vivienne's throat closed. She had to look away for a moment, at the fire, so that the child would not see the water in her eyes. "I am ordinary," she said, when she could speak again. "But I try to be kind." That night Sabine slept in Vivienne's bed, and Vivienne slept in the chair by the fire, wrapped in her cloak, her boots by the hearth to dry. She did not sleep well. She kept turning over the question of what to do. She had no husband. She had no family in the city. Her mother was buried in a small country churchyard 4 days' ride away, and her father had died 2 years before that, and the small annuity he had left her was barely enough for one and certainly not enough for two. She could go to the parish, she supposed. But she had heard about the workhouses and the orphan homes. She had heard what happened to children who went into them. She could not think about that without her stomach turning. By morning, she had decided one thing only. She would try, first, to find who this child belonged to. Someone must be looking. Someone must love her. She dressed Sabine in a dry shift of her own, cut down with pins to fit, and she wrapped her in the shawl again, and she took her hand and walked back out into the November morning. The rain had stopped. The sky was pale gray, the color of a pigeon's wing, and the air smelled of wet stone and coal smoke, and the bakery 3 doors down. Vivienne asked at the bakery. She asked at the chandler's. She asked at the fishmonger and the tea shop and the woman who sold apples on the corner. Nobody knew Sabine. Nobody had seen a carriage stop there yesterday. Nobody had noticed a child left on the bakery step. Except one. An old man who kept a stall of second-hand books at the mouth of the alley. He was leaning on his cane when Vivienne came up to him, and he squinted down at Sabine, and he scratched at his gray beard, and he said, "Aye, miss, aye. I saw the carriage." Vivienne's heart lifted. "You did?" "Whose was it, sir?" The old man frowned. "I could not swear to it," he said. "But I saw the crest on the door. A black stag with an oak leaf in its mouth. I have seen that crest before, at the great house on Wren Street. That is the house of the Duke of Alderton." Vivienne stared at him. "The Duke of Alderton," she repeated. "Aye, that is who I would ask, miss, though I do not think they will be pleased to hear of it." She thanked him and walked away with Sabine's hand in hers, and her mind was moving very fast. The Duke of Alderton. Even she had heard of him. Everyone in London had heard of him. He was young, not yet 30, and he had inherited the title 2 years ago upon the death of his elder brother. He was said to be cold. He was said to be private. He was said to have no wife, no children, no interest in society, and a great deal of money and a great deal of grief. She did not know if any of it was true. But she knew where Wren Street was, and she knew that if the crest was truly his, then someone in that house had left this child in the rain. She looked down at Sabine. The child was walking beside her, holding her doll tight, her small face pinched with cold and worry. "Come along, dear heart," Vivienne said. "We are going to pay a call on a duke." Wren Street was in the western part of the city, where the houses grew tall and the trees grew tall, and the iron railings around the front steps were polished to a black shine. Vivienne had never walked here before. She felt very shabby in her gray cloak. She felt very small beside the great White House with the columns and the bronze door knocker shaped like a lion's head. She knocked. A footman opened the door. He was tall and powdered, and he looked at her as though she were something the cat had brought in. "Delivery's at the side," he said, and began to close the door. "I am not a delivery," Vivienne said, and she put her hand out to hold the door open. Her hand was small, the door was heavy. But she held. "I need to speak with the Duke. I have brought his ward." The footman looked past her, down at Sabine, and his face changed. His mouth opened. His eyes widened. "Miss Sabine," he said. Then he seemed to catch himself. He straightened. "One moment, madam." He shut the door in her face. Vivienne stood on the step. Sabine leaned against her leg. The wind blew a few brown leaves across the pavement. The door opened again. This time it was an older woman in a black dress and a white cap, with keys hanging from her belt. The housekeeper, Vivienne guessed. Her face was pale, and she looked at Sabine as if she were seeing a ghost. "Come in, madam," she said. Her voice shook a little. "Come in at once." Vivienne stepped into a hallway wider than her whole set of rooms. The floor was checkered marble. A staircase swept up to the left. A tall clock ticked in the corner. Somewhere, someone was polishing silver, and Vivienne could smell the beeswax and the faint tang of vinegar. There was a bowl of dried lavender on a table, and a portrait of a stern man in a red coat above it. "Wait here, if you please," the housekeeper said. "I will fetch his grace." "Miss Sabine." She bent down. Her voice broke. "Oh, my lamb, come here, come here." Sabine hesitated. She looked up at Vivienne. Vivienne nodded. Sabine went to the housekeeper, who gathered her up and pressed her face to the child's hair and made a sound that was almost, but not quite, a sob. "I will take her to the kitchen," the housekeeper said. Her voice was tight. "There is a fire, and there is broth." "Wait here, madam. His grace will come." Vivienne nodded. The housekeeper carried Sabine away. Vivienne stood alone in the marble hall, and she wondered what she had walked into. She waited for what felt like a long time. She counted the checkered tiles on the floor. She counted them twice. She was on the third count when she heard boots on the stairs. The Duke of Alderton came down. He was tall, and he did not walk quickly, and he did not walk slowly either. He was dressed all in black, plain black, with white at his collar and his cuffs. His hair was dark. His face was not handsome in the ordinary sense. It was severe. It was a face that did not smile easily and had not smiled today. His eyes were the same gray as Sabine's, and Vivienne understood something then that she had not understood before. He stopped 3 steps from the bottom. He looked at her. He did not speak for a long moment. "You brought her back," he said at last. "Yes, Your Grace." He came down the last 3 steps. He was very close now. He was much taller than she was. He smelled of ink and clean linen and something else, something like leather and rain. He looked into her face as if he were trying to read something written there. "From where?" he asked. His voice was low. It was very quiet. "From the bakery step on Marlow Street," Vivienne said. She was sitting in the rain. She had been there for some hours, I think. His face did not change. But something behind his eyes did. He turned away from her. He walked to the tall window by the door. He put one hand on the sill, and he looked out at the street, and Vivienne watched his shoulders. She watched the way his hand tightened on the sill. She watched the small movement of his throat as he swallowed. "How long?" he said without turning. "I do not know exactly." "The old man who sells books at the corner said he saw the carriage in the morning. I found her at 3 o'clock. She was very cold, Your Grace. She had no shoes. He said a word she did not know, in a voice too soft to be sure. It might have been a curse. It might have been a prayer. Was she hurt? No, only cold. And frightened. Where has she been since you found her?" In my rooms, Vivienne said. I could not leave her in the street. I did not know where she belonged. I asked in the shops this morning. The bookseller recognized your crest. He turned back to her. His face was still severe. But now she saw the tiredness in it, and something else, something raw and half-hidden. Your name, he said. Vivienne Ashcombe. Miss Ashcombe. He inclined his head barely. I am Rowan Merrick, Duke of Alderton. Sabine is my ward. She is the daughter of my late brother. He paused. Yesterday she was to be taken to the country by my aunt, Lady Havenshaw. My aunt returned to me last night saying the child had run off in the market and could not be found. I sent men to search. They found nothing. His mouth was a thin line. It appears my aunt did not tell me the truth. Vivienne did not know what to say to that. She said nothing. You will forgive me, he said. I owe you a great deal, Miss Ashcombe. I do not yet know how much. Will you sit? He gestured toward a small parlor off the hall. I would like to hear the whole of it. She sat. He sat across from her. A tea tray was brought. The tea was hot and dark, and it steamed in the cup. Vivienne wrapped her cold fingers around the porcelain and told him everything. The sobs she had heard on the street, the child on the step, the people walking past, the doll with the missing button, the bare feet, the whisper, they said they would come back, the bookseller, the crest. The Duke listened without moving. His hands were folded on his knee. Only once did she see the muscle in his jaw jump, and that was when she said the words bare feet. When she was done, he was silent for a long time. Miss Ashcombe, he said. How many people passed her on that street? Dozens, Your Grace. And you were the only one who stopped. I do not know that for certain, but it seemed so. He looked at her. He looked at her for so long that she began to feel warm in a way she had not been all morning. His eyes went over her plain cloak, her worn boots, her hands that were red with the cold. He was not judging her. He was seeing her. She could tell the difference. She had spent a great deal of her life not being seen, and she knew what it felt like when someone did. You will stay to dinner, he said. Your Grace, I could not possibly. You will stay to dinner, he said again. It was not a command. It was closer to a request that was afraid of being refused. Sabine will wish to see you. I would like to speak further with you. And I do not think you have eaten today. She had not. Her stomach chose that moment to make a small, betraying sound. She flushed. He did not smile, but something in his face softened by a fraction. Please, he said. She stayed. Dinner was a strange, quiet affair. She sat at a long polished table with the Duke at the head, and Sabine at his right hand, wrapped now in a proper woolen dress and with her hair brushed and her feet in soft slippers. Sabine ate slowly and looked often at Vivienne. The Duke did not speak much. When he did, he spoke to Sabine, gently, in a way that surprised Vivienne. She had thought a duke would speak to a child either not at all or in the false hearty voice grown-ups use when they do not know children. He did neither. He spoke to Sabine as if she were a person. He asked her if the soup was warm enough. He asked her if the slippers were the right size. He asked her once without looking up if she had been very frightened. Sabine nodded. I am sorry, he said. That was all. But he said it as if he meant it. After dinner, he sent Sabine upstairs with the housekeeper. Then he turned to Vivienne, and he said, walk with me a moment. They walked down a long corridor lined with paintings. He stopped at the end, by a set of tall doors. He opened them. Beyond was a library, larger than any Vivienne had ever seen, the walls lined floor to ceiling with books, a fire burning in a marble hearth. The smell was of leather and old paper and beeswax. It was the smell of a place where someone had spent many quiet hours alone. He gestured for her to sit in one of the chairs by the fire. She sat. He did not sit. He stood by the hearth, one hand on the mantel, and he looked into the flames. My aunt, he said, is a woman of very particular views. She did not approve of my brother's marriage. She did not approve of Sabine's mother, who was French and Catholic and had no fortune. When my brother and his wife died last spring in the carriage accident and Sabine came to me, my aunt was displeased. She said the child would ruin my prospects. She said no woman of good family would marry a man saddled with such a burden. He paused. Vivienne watched the firelight move across his face. Yesterday I gave my aunt permission to take Sabine to our country estate for a fortnight. My aunt said the country air would do her good. I believed her. I should not have. It appears my aunt did not intend to take Sabine to the country at all. She intended to leave her in the street, in a part of the city where she thought no one who knew us would ever find her. Vivienne felt her hand tighten on the arm of the chair. She said nothing. When Miss Sabine could not be found last night, my aunt returned here in tears. She played the part very well. She said the child had been careless, had wandered, had been lost. She wept. She said we must send men. We sent men. They found nothing, of course, because they were looking in the wrong part of the city. His hand tightened on the mantel. His knuckles were white. This morning, before you came, my aunt was still here. She was still weeping. She was telling me that perhaps it was for the best, that perhaps, if the child could not be found, we might make the best of a bad situation. Vivienne stared at him. She could not speak for a moment. When she did, her voice was low. "That is a wicked thing," she said. "Yes, Your Grace. What will you do?" He turned to face her. His face was still severe, but the severity had changed. It was no longer the severity of a cold man. It was the severity of a man who had made a decision. "I will do a great many things," he said. "I will begin by making sure my aunt never sets foot in this house again. That is the simplest of them." He looked down at his hand on the mantel, then back at her. "The rest is harder. Miss Sabine trusts you. She spoke of you at dinner. She whispered in my ear that you gave her bread and warmed her feet. She has spoken more this evening than she has spoken since her parents died." Vivienne looked at her lap. She did not know where he was going with this. She did not want to guess wrong. "I would like to ask you something," he said. "Not now. I will not press you now, but in the coming days I would like your permission to call upon you, to ask you some things, and to consider some things together, if you are willing." She looked up. "Your Grace, I do not understand." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Miss Ashcombe, you are a woman I have known for perhaps 3 hours. In that time you have shown me more decency, more courage, and more sense than any person of my acquaintance has shown me in the last 2 years. Do not misunderstand me. I am not making an offer. I am asking permission to become acquainted with you." Vivienne opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I am not of your class, Your Grace." "No," he said, "you are not. I have very little money. I know. People will talk. They already talk," he said. "They will talk more now when they hear what my aunt has done, and they will talk further still when they hear that a young woman with no fortune brought my ward home from the street. I do not care what people say. I care what is true." She was silent. The fire crackled. A log shifted and sent up a small burst of sparks. "I will call upon you," he said. "If you will permit it, I will permit it," she said quietly. He nodded once. Then he did something she did not expect. He crossed to a small writing desk in the corner and took up a piece of paper and a pen, and he wrote a few lines quickly, and he folded the paper and pressed his seal onto the wax. He came back to her and put the paper into her hand. "What is this?" she asked. "Instructions to my bank. If ever you have need of anything, at any hour, you may present this at their door and be attended to. It is not payment for what you have done, Miss Ashcombe. Nothing could be. It is only a small assurance. I would not have you sleep another night worrying about the price of bread." She stared at the paper. She stared at him. "Your Grace, I cannot." "You can," he said. "You will. That is the last we shall speak of it tonight." He rang a bell. The carriage was brought. She was driven home in a coach with velvet seats and silver lamps, and the driver walked her to her door, and she climbed the stairs to her small cold room and sat down on her small hard bed. She did not open the paper. She held it in her lap. She looked at the coals in the grate. She thought of the child on the step. She thought of the aunt in the tall White House, weeping her false tears. She thought of the Duke's face when he had said the words "bare feet." She thought of his gray eyes, so like Sabine's, and she thought about how a man could be severe and gentle at the same time. She did not sleep for a long while. When she did, she dreamed of rain. He called upon her 3 days later. He came in a plain black coat, and he did not bring flowers, and he did not stay long. He asked after her health. He asked her whether she had eaten. He asked her whether she would come to the house that afternoon to see Sabine, who had been asking after her. She went. Sabine flew to her and buried her face in Vivienne's cloak. And Vivienne knelt and held her and stroked her honey hair, and the Duke stood in the doorway and watched them without speaking. He called upon her again the next day. And the day after that. Sometimes he sent a carriage. Sometimes he came himself. Once he came on foot, in the cold, because the coach had gone with his steward on some business, and he had not wished to wait. He said he had walked because it was a fine day. She looked out at the gray sky and did not argue with him. They spoke of small things, books, the weather, the small doings of the household. Sabine's slow return to speech. He never spoke of his aunt. Vivienne did not ask. Then, one afternoon, about 2 weeks after that first meeting, she was walking Sabine home from a small park where they had gone to feed the ducks. It was a cold, clear day, and Sabine was skipping ahead of her, and Vivienne was smiling because the child had laughed twice that morning, and each laugh had gone through her like sunlight. They rounded a corner and came face to face with a woman in a fine plum-colored cloak. The woman was perhaps 50, with the kind of tightly held beauty that comes from careful attention. Her hair was silver at the temples. Her eyes were gray, but not warm. She stopped when she saw them. Her eyes flicked to Sabine. They flicked to Vivienne. "So," she said, "this is her." Vivienne felt Sabine press against her skirts. She placed a hand on the child's shoulder. "I am afraid I do not know you, madam," Vivienne said, though she had guessed. "Do you not?" The woman smiled. It was not a kind smile. "I am Lady Havenshaw. I believe you have made yourself familiar with my nephew's household. How resourceful of you." Vivienne did not answer. "Let me look at you," Lady Havenshaw said. She stepped closer. Her eyes went over Vivienne slowly, from her boots to her cloak to her simple bonnet. "Yes, I see. You are the little seamstress or whatever it is you do who found the child. My nephew has been generous with his gratitude, I understand. He is a man of soft heart in matters he does not fully understand." Vivienne kept her voice level. "Excuse me, we must go." "One moment." Lady Havenshaw's gloved hand rose. It did not touch Vivienne, but it was near enough to stop her. "I wish to give you some advice, my dear. You seem the practical sort. My nephew is grieving. He has confused kindness with attachment, as widowers and bachelors often do. If you have any decency, you will take the coin he no doubt has offered you, and you will go quietly back to your life, and you will not permit yourself to imagine you can raise yourself above your station." The words were not the worst. What was worst was what came next. Lady Havenshaw looked down at Sabine. She looked at the child as if the child were a stain. And she said, in the same calm voice, "A's for this one." She should have stayed on that step. It would have saved us all a great deal of trouble. Half French, half nothing, and now the ruin of a duke's line. You did no one a kindness that afternoon, girl. You only prolonged an ending that ought to have been quick." The street went very still around Vivienne. She heard the clop of a horse somewhere far away. She heard Sabine's small, quick breath. She heard her own heart, thudding once, twice, in her ears. She did not raise her voice. She did not shout. She looked at Lady Havenshaw with a steadiness that surprised even her. "Madam," she said, "that is the wickedest thing I have ever heard a person say. I will not answer you. This child will not answer you. May God have mercy on you, for I do not think you have any on yourself." She took Sabine's hand. She walked past Lady Havenshaw. She did not look back. Sabine's small hand was shaking. Vivienne squeezed it and kept walking, though her own knees felt like water and her chest hurt as if she had been struck. They walked all the way to Wren Street in silence. When they reached the house, the footman opened the door and Sabine ran straight up the stairs. And Vivienne stood in the hallway with her cloak still on and her breath still short. She heard the Duke step behind her before she saw him. "Miss Ashcombe?" She turned. Her face must have shown something, because he came to her in 3 long strides. "What has happened?" "We met your aunt," she said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "In the street. She spoke to us." His face changed. He did not shout. He did not curse. His face simply went still, in the way that deep water goes still before a storm. "What did she say?" "I would rather not repeat it, Your Grace. I need you to tell me." She told him. She kept her voice even. She did not weep. She told him what Lady Havenshaw had said to her, and then, more slowly, what Lady Havenshaw had said about Sabine. When she got to the words half French, half nothing, she saw his hand close into a fist at his side. When she got to "she should have stayed on that step," he closed his eyes for the space of one long breath. When she was finished, he did not speak for what felt like a full minute. "Thank you," he said at last, very quietly. "Please stay to tea. I will return shortly." He did not return that evening. She had tea with Sabine and read to her from a book of nursery rhymes, and when Sabine's eyes grew heavy, she carried her upstairs and tucked her into the great bed with the blue curtains, and she sat by the bed until the child was asleep. The housekeeper met her in the hall. "His Grace has gone to Havenshaw House," the housekeeper said. "He asked me to tell you that a carriage will take you home whenever you wish, and that he will call upon you tomorrow." He came the next morning. He was dressed in the same plain black. He looked tired. He did not sit. "I have removed my aunt from all of my houses," he said. "Her allowances stopped. She has been informed that she will not receive further invitations to any home connected with me, nor will I acknowledge her at any social gathering. I have written to her son, who is in the north, and told him what she did. He is a decent man and will not defend her. She will retire to a small property she owns near the coast. She will not trouble Sabine again, and she will not trouble you. Your Grace, there is more," he said. "I have this morning had a notice placed in the papers. It states, in plain terms, that Miss Sabine Merrick is my ward, that she is loved, and that any person who repeats the slanders that have been circulated about her by a certain party in my family will be answered to by me personally. I have named my aunt in the notice, publicly. It will be read this afternoon in every drawing-room in the city." Vivienne stared at him. "Your Grace, that will cause a great scandal. Yes, you will be talked of. I am talked of already." He said it without heat. "Miss Ashcombe, I did not do this for society. I did it because a woman said to my ward that she should have stayed on that step, and I will not permit such a thing to be said, quietly or otherwise, ever again. Not in this city, not in this country, not while I live." She sat down slowly on her small chair. He watched her. "There is one further thing," he said. "Yes?" He hesitated. Then he crossed the room and knelt down by her chair. Not on one knee in the way of a proposal, but on both in the way of a man who had decided to be at eye level with someone smaller. He set his hands on the arms of her chair. Their faces were very close. She could smell the rain on his coat and the wood smoke, and the thing underneath she still could not name. "I have thought of little else for a fortnight," he said. His voice was low. "I know what my station is. I know what yours is. I know what people will say. I do not care. I care that when I close my eyes, I see you kneeling in the rain on a stone step in front of a child who was not yours, wrapping her in your cloak. I care that Sabine has spoken more in these 2 weeks than in the 6 months before. I care that when you come into a room, the room becomes a place I want to be." He paused. His gray eyes did not leave hers. "I am not going to ask you today. I am going to give you time. But I want you to know that when the time is right, I will ask. And I want to know now, before I ask, whether the answer will be no. If it will be no, tell me now, and I will spare us both." Vivienne could not speak. She looked at his face. She looked at the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. She looked at the small scar at the edge of his lip that she had not noticed before. She thought of Sabine upstairs in the blue bed. She thought of her own mother's shawl worn around a small, cold body. She thought of the crowd walking past on Marlow Street. She thought of a man who had put his own name on a public notice to defend a child who was not, by blood, entirely his. "It will not be no," she whispered. He did not smile. But something in his face broke open, and she saw for the first time what he looked like when he was not being severe. "Thank you," he said. He rose. He kissed the back of her hand one time, very lightly. "I will not press further today. I will call tomorrow." He went to the door. He paused. He turned. "Miss Ashcombe." "Yes, Your Grace. When I do ask," he said, "I would like to do so where it began, in front of that bakery, on that step, if you will permit it." She nodded. She could not speak. He left. She sat in her chair for a long time, and she watched the coals, and she felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire. He kept his word. He did not press. He called every day. Sometimes he brought Sabine. Sometimes he did not. He never brought flowers. He brought instead small things she had mentioned once and forgotten. A book of poems by a writer she had said she loved. A pot of honey from a hive on his country estate, because she had said once that her mother used to keep bees. A pair of warm gloves, because he had noticed, without her knowing he noticed, that her old ones had a hole in one thumb. Once, a maid at the house on Wren Street told her, in passing, that the Duke had gone very early one morning down to the kitchen to give the scullery girl a purse of coin because he had learned she was sending money home to a sick brother in the country. He had not told the girl who it was from. He had left it wrapped in paper with a note that said only, "For your brother. Do not thank me." The maid told Vivienne this because the scullery girl had been weeping in the pantry, and the maid had asked her why, and the story had come out. The maid did not know the Duke had done this. She thought it must have been the housekeeper. Vivienne did not tell her otherwise. But she knew. She knew the way he wrote his notes, short and unadorned. She knew he had gone down to the kitchen himself because he had not wished to shame the girl. She held that piece of knowledge like a coal in her chest, and it warmed her for days. Winter deepened. The snow came. Sabine grew stronger. She spoke in full sentences now. She laughed often. She followed Vivienne about the great house on Wren Street as if she were afraid Vivienne might disappear if she looked away too long. Vivienne did not disappear. She came every day. She read to Sabine. She taught her the names of the flowers pressed in the old herbal she found in the library. She sat in the parlor with the Duke in the evenings, and they spoke of small things. And sometimes they spoke of larger things, and sometimes they did not speak at all, and the not speaking was as easy as the speaking. Then, one afternoon in the second week of December, he sent word that he would call for her at 3 o'clock. It was a Tuesday. The snow lay in a clean, thin sheet on the pavements. The sky was a cold, pale blue. She dressed carefully, in the best dress she had, which was not fine, but was clean and neat and gray. She pinned her hair. She wrapped herself in her cloak. She waited by the window. The carriage came at 3. He was in it. He handed her in himself. He did not smile. But there was something in his face, some contained brightness, that made her heart begin to beat too fast. They drove for a while. She did not ask where they were going. She thought she knew. The carriage stopped at the corner of Marlow Street. He handed her out. The bakery was there, and the step, and the shutter of the window above. The snow had swept up against the stone in a small white drift. The old bookseller was at his stall at the mouth of the alley. He tipped his hat when he saw her. Rowan led her to the step. He stopped in front of it. He turned to face her. The wind moved a strand of her hair against her cheek. He reached up, very slowly, and tucked it behind her ear. His hand was warm. Her breath caught. She realized then that a small crowd had gathered at a polite distance. She had not noticed at first. 2 women with baskets, a boy with a hoop, a gentleman in a tall hat, the bookseller, a maid from a house across the way. They were watching. They were quiet. He knelt. He knelt on the stone step, the same stone step in front of her. He took her hand in both of his. His gray eyes looked up at her. The cold reddened his cheeks. His breath came out in a small white cloud. Somewhere a bell struck the quarter hour. The sound hung in the air. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The street had gone silent. "Vivienne Ashcombe," he said. His voice was low, but it carried. "On this step, 6 weeks ago, a child of mine sat in the rain. Everyone in this city ignored her. You were the only one who took her home. You did not know who she was. You did not know who I was. You did it because you saw her, when no one else would." He paused. His hands tightened around hers. "I have loved you since the moment you told me she had no shoes," and your voice broke on the word. "I am not a man who speaks easily. I will not ask you again after today. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, and Sabine's mother, and the mistress of my house? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the woman who stopped?" The crowd did not breathe. The bookseller had taken off his hat. The women with baskets had gone very still. The boy with the hoop was staring, mouth open. The wind blew a scattering of snow across the step. Vivienne felt the tears come. She did not try to stop them. She looked down at him, at his kneeling shape, at the man who had put his name on a public paper to defend a child, at the man who had walked in the cold rather than wait for a carriage, at the man who had gone down to a kitchen to give money to a scullery maid and left a note that said, "Only do not thank me." She knelt too. On the same step, face to face with him, her knees on the cold stone through her thin dress, her hands still in his. Somewhere behind her someone made a soft sound. She did not look. She looked at Rowan. "Yes," she said. "Yes, of course. Yes." He closed his eyes, just for a moment, just for one long breath. Then he opened them. He did not kiss her, not on a public street, not with all those eyes. He did something better. He pressed his forehead to hers. Their breath mingled between them. His hand came up and cupped the side of her face, and she felt the rough of his glove and the warmth beneath it, and he said, in a voice only she could hear, "Thank you. Thank you. Thank you." The bookseller began to clap, slowly, then the maid across the way, then the women with baskets, the gentleman in the tall hat. The boy with the hoop, delighted, not fully understanding, joining in because everyone else was. The sound of clapping spread down Marlow Street. A small, strange sound in the cold December afternoon, and Vivienne laughed against Rowan's forehead, and he laughed too, though she thought perhaps there was a tear on his cheek that did not belong to her. He helped her to her feet. He led her back to the carriage. As they passed the bookseller, the old man bowed to her. "Miss," he said, "I am glad it was you." "So am I," she said. They drove back to Wren Street. Sabine was waiting at the door with a small nosegay of hothouse violets she had picked out herself from the greenhouse. She looked up at them, at their faces, and her small face broke into the widest smile Vivienne had ever seen on her. "Did you say yes?" Sabine asked. "I said yes," Vivienne said. Sabine dropped the violets. She threw her arms around Vivienne's waist. She pressed her face into her. "Mama," she said. Vivienne could not speak. She looked over the top of Sabine's honey head at Rowan. He was standing very still. His eyes were bright. He nodded to her. Once small, they were married in the spring, in the small chapel of the country estate, with only a handful of guests. Sabine wore a dress of pale green muslin and carried a basket of primroses. Rowan wore his plain black coat with a single sprig of white heather in the buttonhole because Vivienne had once said it was her mother's favorite. Vivienne wore ivory silk, the first fine thing she had ever owned, and around her neck a small locket he had given her the morning of the wedding. Inside the locket, on one side, was a lock of Sabine's honey hair. On the other side, a scrap of paper with 3 words written in Rowan's plain hand, "You saw her." A year after that, on a snowy afternoon in December, Vivienne stood at the window of the drawing room at Wren Street. The fire was crackling. The room smelled of pine boughs because they had begun to decorate for Christmas. Somewhere upstairs, Sabine was singing to her new baby brother, a small dark-haired thing with gray eyes, whom she had named Merry Mouse for reasons known only to herself. Rowan had let the name stand for a full week before gently suggesting that the child's Christian name would be Alwyn, though he was welcome to answer to Merry Mouse in the family circle. Sabine had considered this and agreed. Vivienne watched the snow fall on the street below. A woman was hurrying past with a basket on her arm. A boy was carrying a tray of chestnuts. A gentleman in a fine hat did not look up. And there, on the corner, half hidden by the railing of the neighbor's steps, was a small figure. A woman, perhaps, wrapped in a thin shawl, not begging, just standing, as if she did not know where to go. Vivienne turned from the window. She crossed the room to the bell. She rang it. When the housekeeper came, Vivienne said, "There is a woman on the corner. She looks cold. Bring her in, please. Warm her by the kitchen fire. Give her tea. Ask her what she needs." The housekeeper smiled. "Yes, madam." Rowan looked up from the desk in the corner, where he had been writing letters. His eyes met hers across the room. He did not speak. He did not need to. She saw the small movement at the corner of his mouth that was, in him, a smile. She smiled back. She went to him. She put her hand on his shoulder. He covered her hand with his own. Outside, the snow kept falling. Somewhere in the house, Sabine was singing to Merry Mouse. The fire burned bright and steady. And in a warm kitchen down the hall, a stranger who had almost gone unseen was being given a chair, and a cup, and a name. That was the whole of it, a crying girl on a step, and the one woman who stopped, and a duke who was severe until he was not, and a house that had been quiet for a long time until it learned, at last, how to hold a child's laughter and a woman's kindness inside its walls. All the great world went hurrying past outside, cold and busy and unseeing. But inside, where it mattered, no one who came to that door would ever again be walked around, or stepped over, or left to weep alone in the rain.